next segment on the listing agreement, I think we'll talk a little bit more about what we believe we're likely to see.
That was a good segue.
And what we're moving in the listing agreement?
Yeah.
Okay, well, not to steal your thunder there. Yeah.
No, that was well planned.
But, some of the guidance, you got to be thinking about what you're going to advise your client as a listing agent when it comes to the new breakout sections on listing broker compensation on its own, the buyer broker compensation, if any, to be offered versus subsidy, seller subsidy to the buyer to be offered. So,
right. So that's next.
Yeah.
Exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Quite a few changes here, especially I think the first part we wanted to chat about was under the Section 4, agreement terms and listing terms, right? So they altered this paragraph. It now identifies both an agreement term and also a listing term, right? So the agreement term, I think, is very similar to what we're used to before. It just says this agreement will run for a period commencing upon the signature by all parties and expire at 11/59 on whatever that date is. Make sure you put a date in here. Very rarely do we see one as, like, we used to see a lot, 90 days from the date the property goes in the MLS or stuff like that, but try and put a date in there.
and that's actually not okay to put 90 days from MLS, really.
Right.
That's ambiguous, so.
Well, they do have in here, if it's left blank, it is defaulted to 90 days from the date.
That's Virginia law.
Yeah. And then you also have the listing term, right? The listing term begins when the seller instructs the broker to allow any potential buyers to learn about the property. Listing term shall go into effect on or about whatever that date is. So if you're signing a listing today and you're not going to publish it as a coming soon or put it out there until July 15th, that would be the date that you would put in there, right? Because you're not going to put it out there for potential buyers to learn about until that time frame. So 2 separate dates now, right, outlined here. It did kind of used to be in the marketing. They kind of moved this a little bit. It used to be in the marketing paragraph 10 of the old listing, but now it's out here in front. So this is when it's going to go. It's going to go in. It also puts in the new terms from the MLS, saying that it has to be uploaded in the MLS as either a office exclusive, coming soon, or an active listing within 2 days after the start of the listing term. So, or as MLS rules require. So make sure within that 2-day period of time you have uploaded your MLS or uploaded into the MLS and published it as either a coming soon active or office exclusive.
So this one line again under the listing term, the definition says the listing term begins when seller instructs broker to allow any potential buyers to learn about the property. That I talked with Steve a little bit about that. I'm going to be interested in seeing how additional instructors present that, because to me it sounded a little bit vague, or what does that really mean? When seller instructs broker to allow any potential buyers to learn about the property. I think that what you should, and then it says listing terms shall go into effect on or before blank. I think that you should really take that to mean, certainly if you are thinking you're going to show the property before it, as you're getting ready, you're fixing up the property and all of that, anytime you are actively sharing information that could result in a showing, obviously then that would be the commencement of the listing term, right. And you got to put it in MLS within 2 days, right, of that, either as a office exclusive, and hopefully most of you have become more familiar with that. It's been the source of a lot of confusion and a little bit of change, evolution on the part of Bright, but there's good reasons for that. You put it in as a coming soon, even though you're not going to be ready for showings for whatever period of time. it gets entered into MLS as an office exclusive.
Right. Well, I think the checkbox too on that office exclusive form, there's two checkbox. One is that you're going to aggressively market it as an office exclusive, or two, you're going to not allow any showings during the you're not going to effectively market it or do anything with it during the office exclusive period. So I think if you're checking the box that you're not going to do anything with it during the office exclusive, because I mean, you have to put it in within 2 days, right? But if you're not going to do anything with it, like put it on the Samson page, the insider page, or you're going to put it in First Up or something like that, that would be actively marketing it as an office exclusive. If you're not going to do that, I think that it's going to determine what your listing date or listing term date would be.
Right.
So if you're going to market it as office exclusive within 2 days, that would be, or whatever that time is, that would be the date. If you're not going to actively market it as an office exclusive, you're just putting it in to publish it to comply with MRIS rules, then whatever date it is that you're expecting it to either go coming soon or active, I think that would be the date that you would put in there.
Fair enough. One more comment on these two terms, agreement term and listing term. I think it's important to make sure your agreement term is out there, because you don't want to be caught with a situation where your listing term is limiting you. You don't have enough time,
Right.
Because ultimately it's the agreement term that's going to control, because that's the brokerage agreement term.
For sure.
The two dates might not coincide at the start, but at the end they have to, right? I mean, the expiration of it. You can't have your listing term exceed your agreement term. Fun stuff, right? Yeah. What's next?
Next paragraph is your listing broker compensation paragraph. Here we go again, right? So talking about, no, I guess not. Talking about your listing broker compensation. Once again, they put that nice big bold lettering up at the top of the field here to let you know that the listing brokerage compensation and buyer broker compensations are fully negotiable and are not fixed, controlled, recommended, or suggested by law of any MLS system or association of realtor. That sounds like a great statement. CYA, right? CYA.
It's basically always been in there, though, right?
Right.
They just moved it around.
So now we only have a listing broker commission, right? Before we used to have total commission. How much are we charging you totally? Now we're sitting down with the seller, and I just have to tell him for what I'm charging you for a listing broker compensation. Here is my value added for my portion of the commission. And so that would be in paragraph A. And that could be denoted as a percentage of the gross sale price. It could be denoted as a dollar amount, or it could be noted as a percentage of the gross price plus an additional amount. So if you're with a team, or you have a team fee or a transaction fee that you personally are adding to the transaction, then you would put it in as, say, 2% or 3% or whatever, plus whatever your team fee is added onto there. And then, of course, the $345 brokerage fee would go down in paragraph D.
Right, that's separate. Please keep it separate.
Separate.
There's a spot for it. It's defined. That's a brokerage service fee. Our fee's $345. Whatever you negotiate for yourself and or team expenses, team admin fee, marketing fee, staging fee,
Right.
all of that is totally fine. But we ask that you not attempt to combine it and make it presented as though it's the Samson Properties brokerage service fee, because especially now with all this additional scrutiny on commissions, this goes for buyers in the buyer agency agreement as well, or in the listing agreement, plus the off chance potential for some fair housing claim, right? If somebody finds out that we charged them more, if they were charged more than somebody else was, it's just not something we want to get anywhere close to. So more power to you. Earn your commissions, But remember that you all are in the driver's seat with what you negotiate for your own commission. Company dollar's the same here, right? But, and we understand that it's a little easier for agents to get the seller to agree to it or sign off on it if it is presented as a non-negotiable company fee. But it's not right. So, sharpen your game, articulate why that fee, that additional fee that you're charging on top of the base commission is justified, and earn it.
So, and then still in paragraph A, the brokerage compensation that when earned is still the same as it was in the old listing agreement. So you would want to put a number, days in after the expiration or termination of the listing agreement, how many days afterwards you're still entitled to your listing broker compensation. Paragraph B is a totally new paragraph, additional listing brokerage compensation for unrepresented buyers, right? So the powers to be saw that there's a potential here for buyers to go out directly to the listing agent once we switch over here as broker commissions are removed from the MLS. So they added in this additional paragraph. If for some reason an unrepresented buyer comes to your listing, what are you going to charge additionally, if anything, to perform ministerial acts for that buyer and get that contract through? I would highly recommend that you charge something, right?
Absolutely.
If you've ever done
Sold your own listing,
or as a buyer worked with a FSBO, there's a whole lot of extra work to do, right? When you're working with another party that doesn't have an agent. So make sure that you put something in there of what you feel your value added would be in order to do that. So they
and obviously
added that paragraph.
in the listing agreement, in that role, of course, you're working as a fiduciary for the seller, right? You got an unrepresented buyer, but it's your job to work in the seller's best interest with that unrepresented buyer to result in the best possible ratified contract and successful closing. Likewise, when you're a buyer agent, you need to remind these buyers that if they don't agree to pay, or if you see buyers that are inclined to go straight to the listing agent, which we see, and we're going to see more of that probably, you got to remind them that do you really understand that the listing agent would love for you to come in and work with them unrepresented, but that listing agent has a legal responsibility to work in the best interests of the seller, not you. So that's why you want to work with me, right?
Right. And then paragraph C is variable rate compensation. It's still in here. Most of the time when I saw it in use before, it was used to reduce the total compensation if it was an unrepresented buyer. So I'm assuming that this variable rate compensation may only be used now for internal company reductions if the buyer comes, through the same company or whatever. But I would assume this is probably going to disappear.
Yeah, so in my practice over the years, and I think probably true of a lot of you, if you were inclined to enter into a listing agreement with a little bit of an incentive to the seller that if you sell that listing yourself, it might be 0.5% lower or whatever, that's been a long-standing option. Not every agent would offer that, but it can be a tool to get the listing if you're competing potentially, that there would be some variable in that total listing commission if there's no other broker involved, no other agent, whether it's another agent from Samson or any other broker. We always used to use that paragraph as an example of variable rate. That is a variable rate, and that has to be disclosed. That always had to be disclosed if in MLS as a modified exclusive listing variable rate, if there's going to be a reduction in total commission paid by the seller if the listing agent is selling it themselves compared to if there's co-brokerage. The reason was so that buyers that have buyer agents can be on a level playing field. So they're saying, though, because now they've come out with the breakout on listing broker compensation and then seller paid buyer broker compensation, don't use the variable rate compensation paragraph to compensate for that.
Yep. And then paragraph 6, for the most part, is the same, all language that we've seen in previous listing agreements. And then we move on to paragraph 7, which is a brand new paragraph, which is the seller paid buyer broker compensation. So this is now added in. It used to be paragraph 12C, right? We used to denote what we were going to pay the buyer agent from our total compensation, but now it's the seller paid buyer compensation paragraph, right? So here is where we're going to have the conversation with the seller and say, hey, seller, do we want to offer any compensation out to anybody that's bringing us a buyer? Yes or no? And here's why we should, or here's why we shouldn't. And you should have that conversation at that point with the seller in regards to whether or not what's going on in the neighborhood, what you see out in the neighborhood, what tactical advantage it could be to offer buyer agent compensation, and that would be checked and noted in this paragraph.
So obviously this is acknowledging that it's not going to go in the MLS. The seller, and you can tell the seller that. This isn't, when we say offer it or make it available, that's so that you all as the listing agent can offer it for our seller's benefit to increase the pool of buyers that are working with buyer agents like we always have, and market that on any other platform besides the MLS. On your own individual website, if you do listings, property-specific listings, of course, that's where you would put it. You could put a sign rider on the sign if you wanted, or in your own Facebook marketing media, social media, any other advertising outside of MLS. My hope is that the vast majority of you understand the value of that cooperative broker compensation. I mean, we could go on and on and on about the merits of the lawsuit and the settlement and all of this. The new reality is what it is, and there's benefits with respect to transparency, but I'm not convinced, and I don't know that I'll ever be convinced, that in the vast majority of cases, the cooperative broker compensation, buyer's broker compensation, isn't a good thing, because it always has been. And obviously the buyer finances it into the purchase price that they ultimately agree to pay. So they pay it every bit as much or more so than the seller does. It just comes out of the seller proceeds, but that means all the closing costs of the seller, both listing side commission and buyer broker commission, if there is any, plus all the other seller's closing costs, that's all paid for out of the transaction that the buyer is funding, right? So, keep the faith. The system has worked great for decades and decades and decades, and the single biggest problem we have in our marketplace is lack of inventory. It's not interest rates and all that, but it's a lack of inventory. And I believe that the more listing agents, if the listing agents actively facilitate listing agreements where the seller says, I'm not open to paying any brokerage because of what they heard on the radio or in the news, right? I think that's only going to result in a protracted seller's market. We need more inventory, and without offers of compensation, more and more buyers are going to go straight to listing agents and straight to sellers.
Yep.
And that's not going to bring the cost of housing down, which is what some might be saying out there, that somehow this is going to benefit buyers and home ownership in America. I'll get off my soapbox now. But,
and that was an editorial by Mike Briggs. No.
On the record.
So, and then lastly, we have the seller subsidy paragraph, which is adds in the seller if the seller wants to offer a seller subsidy. Now, remember from the video, this seller subsidy could be theoretically an offer of compensation that the buyer could use to pay their buyer agent, right? So, but if the seller offers it, it has to be offered whether there's an agent or not. So if you're chatting with your buyer agent or you're chatting with your seller and they decide to do a seller subsidy of, 2% or 2 chickens or whatever you want to call it here, and the buyer comes without an agent, and the seller says, well, they didn't have an agent, I don't want to offer this, right? But the buyer saw it in the MLS as a subsidy and wants the subsidy. It has to be, you have to make sure that the seller understands that, yes, if we're trying to forego the 752 phone calls that we may get for agents calling us to ask if the seller is interested in paying any buyer agent compensation and are going to slide it in under a seller subsidy, remember that if it's in the MLS as a seller subsidy and the buyer comes without an agent and asks for the seller subsidy, they're still entitled to it. Of course, it's negotiable, but I don't want to be the first case where I'm working for a seller and they don't give it to the buyer and they're unrepresented because the seller said, well, I was only offering that because that was for a buyer agent. So it's a slippery slope, right?
But it'll be interesting to see how many listing agents choose to advise their seller to allow them to enter in a nice subsidy of certain percent, flat fee or percentage, as an indicator to buyer agents that there's a pot of money there that can be used as the buyer chooses, for example, to cover the buyer's obligation for buyer broker commission. I mean, that's the key. It's a new field and it's searchable. I mean, it's right there, subsidy being offered. Maybe the listing agent would offer buyer closing cost subsidy and buyer brokerage commission. You're just going to have to put that in your offer, and we're getting to the residential contract next. But the buyer could ask for both. The buyer could ask for subsidy and for the seller to pay, regardless of what was advertised.
Well, just a couple things here on the marketing, right? So they made a couple changes in the marketing section, paragraph 13. Right. The MLS marketing, yes or no, whether the seller authorized the broker to market the property in the MLS. And if the seller authorizes broker to market the property in the MLS, broker will disseminate via MLS information regarding the property, including listing price, final sale price, all permissible terms, and all status updates during and after the expiration of the agreement. Broker will enter the listing information in the MLS within 2 days of the listing term or as MLS rules required. Or 2, if seller does not authorize broker to market property in the MLS, broker will instead market property as an office exclusive listing unless and until seller desires to market property via the MLS. Office exclusive means seller instructs broker to restrict the marketing of the property only to broker network, right? So internally to Samson only, so that's first up, right? If you haven't downloaded the app, make sure you do that sometime soon. For each office exclusive listing, seller will sign and deliver concurrently with an agreement and MLS required form specifying that the seller does not authorize broker to publicly market the listing via the MLS. So that would be that form, that the bright office exclusive form. You would have to make sure you have a copy of that in your file, right? You don't have to upload that into the MLS anymore, but you have to keep a copy on hand.
Another thing you can do is change whether or not it's going to be pushed out to third-party websites. You might have some situations where if you're doing an office exclusive, so coming soon, they don't go out anyway, right? They don't go to third-party websites?
Yeah, some they do now, I think.
Okay.
Coming soon, right? Yep.
There's another section in the listing agreement that has been there before third-party website, and you might not want to do that in the beginning, but only after you go to coming soon or fully active.
Right. Another added field that they added here on the bottom of that paragraph is the seller authorizes or does not authorize the display of the buyer broker compensation, if any, on third-party websites. So if they're offering buyer agent compensation, your seller is offering it, They also have to say whether or not they authorize you to display that, right, on your third-party website, which would be your website or any other website outside of the MLS. So
Or pushing emails to the top producers in the neighborhood or your network of agents. Yeah, that's a new one in there.
So any questions on that part of the marketing? Excellent. So I also did some talking points for sellers as well. I'm just going to breeze through that in hopes of getting to the residential sales contract, but these are just some talking points that I put in here for sellers. So when you're talking to your sellers about points of their listing agreement,